Hello, my dear students. Welcome to the session number 9 of the Model Developmental Psychology tool. This class, we will talk about adult social and emotional development. This is the last class of this module in which we will talk about this period of development, and there are two main topics that we will talk about: adult relationships and building and maintaining a family. These are really important aspects of the social and emotional development of adults. As usual, I prepared a list of vocabulary for you to be prepared before the class, and let's go to the topic of today's class. As usual, when we introduce the topic of psychosocial development, we talk about the theory of Erik Erikson. And when we are in adulthood, we are talking about two stages for the theory of Erikson: the stage 6 and the stage 7. The stage 6 will be related to young adulthood, more or less from 20 to 40 years old. And this is what Erikson called the stage of intimacy versus isolation. As you know, the theory of Erikson is based on the resolution of crises that we have in different moments of life. For Erikson, normative crises that usually everybody has. And for him, the biggest challenge that we have in this period of our life is to create love relations in order to be together and to build intimacy with someone. So, for a good resolution of this crisis, this need of being intimate to someone, a good resolution would imply intimacy, that I will be close to someone. A negative resolution would be related to fear of intimacy. When we reach middle adulthood, around 40 years old, Erik Erikson talks about one crisis of generativity versus stagnation. This is related essentially with parenting and mentoring. This is the idea in which when we reach this age, adults have this perception that life is finite. This I started now in middle age. I reached the middle point of my life, and I'm being aware that life is finite and it will end at some point. So the idea that now I have the perception that did I generate life? I have someone to take care of. I have someone that will take care of me in the future. And in my work, I generated something positive and useful to continue after me. And this is the main crisis that we have. With a positive resolution, uh, we will have a sensation of generativity, that we did something and we produce and we have someone to continue after us. Without a positive resolution, we have a sense of stagnation, that we keep stopped and you didn't leave anything new and interesting in life. In the next slides here, you have a better description of the ideas of Erikson for each of these stages. The stage 6, love, intimacy versus isolation, and stage 7, generativity versus stagnation, that we might have around middle adulthood. Interestingly, Erikson also identified some central tasks that people have in middle adulthood after 40 years old. And again, this includes to express love through more than sexual contacts. This love that is more than sex, that is related to emotional development and not only with the biological need, but also many other tasks related to our relationship with others, namely our partners and our children. So one important aspect of adult social and emotional development is about relationships. and this aspect of intimacy and love. That's why the first task that I ask you to do for this class is just simply to answer to this question. What is love? Indeed, to define love, it's a huge challenge that people in many different areas, not only in psychology, but in many different areas of knowledge, including literature and poetry, are trying to do. I put here a very, very nice poem of Luís de Camões. You know, Luís de Camões is very famous in Macau. We have the Camões Garden because this Portuguese poet has been in Macau many years ago. And he wrote a very, very interesting poem about what is love. And what I want for this is to know your own ideas about what is love. Yes, so please think about it, and on next class we will think and discuss and talk about this. In psychology, one of the most famous theories explaining what is love is the Sternberg's triangular intimacy. This gentleman, Sternberg, identified three main components to define what is love. One component of intimacy, one component of passion, and one component of commitment. Yes? So intimacy is everything related to a sense of closeness, affection, and being connected to someone. When we spend time, lots of time together with someone, we start to expose ourselves, not to be concerned that that person knows about our vulnerabilities, our aspects of our functioning that we are not that proud. Indeed, it's really interesting. I used to say that the biggest difference between passion and love is that when we have passion, we like someone because of. When we love someone, we like that person in spite of. And this is related to intimacy. When we are related to someone, we don't have problems in expose ourselves. We don't need to hide anything because we are intimate. And when I talk about hiding, I'm talking about physically. I can show my body, but I'm also talking about psychologically. I can share my thoughts, my emotions with someone we love. And this is intimacy. However, for Sternberg, love also includes passion. And passion is related to sexual drive, to desire, to attraction, to physical closeness, and to romance. And for Sternberg, this is also a dimension of love. Finally, one third dimension is commitment. We already talked about commitment when we talked about the transition to adulthood, and when we talked about the status of identity for James Marcia. Indeed, commitment is an aspect of love for Sternberg because when we are with someone, we define that this is a long-term decision and we invest in this relationship, and this implies commitment. So, based on these three dimensions, intimacy, passion, and commitment, Sternberg defined different types of love. And in these pictures that we have here, you can see a representation, a visual representation of these different types of love. And of course, what he called a consummate love, this one, is a love that includes all these dimensions: passion, intimacy, and commitment. But indeed, sometimes in the relationships that we have with someone, something is missing. And some of these love relationships are not fully consummate. And that's when all the different types of love will appear. We have empty love, in which there is only commitment, but no passion and no intimacy. We have liking, just the fact of liking someone, And when we just like someone, we have intimacy, we are close to that person, but there's no passion and there's no commitment, and so on. In this table that I took from the book of Feldman, you can see the different types of love identified by Sternberg with a small, with some examples for each type of love. Indeed, this is a very interesting theoretical framework to understand love from a psychological or scientific point of view. But in psychology, it was not only Sternberg who talked about love. In positive psychology, and you will have one model exclusive for positive psychology. And in positive psychology, also talks about love. And love is identified as one of the 24 character strengths identified by Peterson and Seligman in their handbook from 2004. For them, love represents a cognitive, behavioral, and emotional stance toward others that takes three prototypical forms. So, for them, love is based on three dimensions. Cognitive is related with the thoughts, what we think about the other, what we think about someone. It's related also to behaviors, the way we act through the others, and also with emotions about what we feel about other people. And these three forms are related to the type of relationship we have with other people. First, we might have love for individuals who are our primary sources of affection, protection, and care. And this is, of course, the child's love for a parent, the love that we have to our parents, because they were our primary sources of protection and care. They took care of us. They gave us affection and they protected us. And the love that we have for our parents is the first type of love. On the other hand, we have the love for those who depend on us. And here is the opposite, is the love that the parents have for their children. When we have someone who depends on us, someone that we take care, someone that we put effort to protect and to make them feel safe, that makes us love them. I don't know if some of you read the story of the Little Prince, but it's exactly what he said about the rose, that love is about the time he spent taking care of that rose. And the third type of love is what in positive psychology they call is related with the passionate desire. So this is the love related to a romantic love, to someone with whom we are expecting to have sexual, physical, and emotional closeness to live our life together. So for Peterson Seligman, love is about the love that we have to our parents, the love we have to our children, and the romantic love we have to someone to whom we want to share our lives. Uh, in the Character and Strengths Handbook from Peter and Seligman, they made some questions to evaluate in which measure uh, people consider that they have love in their lives. So from the book of Peter and Seligman, page 305, I took those questions. And we will not discuss in the class, but because love indeed is very important in adult life. Well, love is important in any moment of our life, but is an essential dimension of adult life. I will challenge you to think about these questions. There is someone with whom I feel free to be myself. So when there is love and we have intimacy and trust on these people, we can feel that we can be free to be ourselves. There is someone I trust to help and I know that supports me. There is someone I hate to be away from very long time. There is someone for whom I would do almost anything, and so on. Think about this. It would be good that if you would have someone for each of these dimensions, it would be great. And here we could say that you have love in your life, and that would be great. Another important aspect that I would like to reflect with you when talking about love is the association between love and attachment. You remember that last year when we talked about uh, social emotional development in infancy and early childhood, we talked about the importance of attachment. Attachment as a close bond we create with our primary caregivers. You remember, I asked you this in the final exam. And indeed, the studies are showing that the attachment styles we created in our infancy will affect our romantic relationships when we become adults. Indeed, there is a continuity between our infants' attachment styles and the way we behave as adults in our relationship, romantic relationship with others. So, and it's because of that I would like you to make the task number 19. I would like you to think about what you remember about Mary Ainsworth's attachment styles. Try to remember what are those. We talked about secure and insecure attachment styles. We talked about a strange situation as a strategy to evaluate attachment styles. And I would like you to make a revision to see what you remember about that. And then I would like you to think by yourselves uh, about the type of relationship that you might expect between the different attachment styles and the intimate relationship that we have as an adult. What is the relationship that you expect to find? Well, and this relationship is described indeed in the next slides. We are expecting that people will have secure attachment styles as children will find more easy to get close to other people and to have stable relationships with others. On the other hand, we are expected that people with avoidant attachment styles and ambivalent attachment styles will have more difficulty in establishing these romantic relationships with other people. But that I would like you to think a little bit by yourselves. Finally, when we have love, it's expected that adults will build and maintain a family. So all the topics related to building and maintaining a family are also important for adult social and emotional development. Um, Indeed, there is a kind of natural course of relationships. Indeed, everybody or most of people at some point of their relationships, at some point of their life, they feel this need to go to the next step in the relationship for a more intimate relationship, for more commitment, and eventually to live together, to start a new family. And live together does not necessarily mean to marry with someone. Living together is a project of intimacy and commitment that people might have, and marriage is only one contract that we can have. But many people can build a family in a process of cohabitation, not necessarily being married, and this number of people is really increasing. Uh, well, as you can imagine, maybe you already observed that in your own experiences being members of a family. The conflict when two people decide to live together the rest of their life, the conflict is not unusual. Indeed, it is very frequent, and we can even say that conflict is normative. And this is related with the difference between ideals, with the dreams that we have. We have here these nice pictures of the marriage, uh, that everything will be like a fairy tale or a story of a princess and the prince. But indeed, the everyday life reality of living together is not that easy. And this will bring conflicts necessarily. And when there are studies showing that when we think about marital satisfaction, that means how happy and satisfied we have to the fact of being married and living with someone, when we talk about that, this is what we call a U-shaped configuration. We start very happy at the beginning. Everything is very nice at the beginning, but when we have the first kids, the satisfaction in the relationship will go down and will continue usually down during all the period of infancy and childhood of our kids. And it's when, usually when they become young adults, eventually the period of life in which the parents of most of you are, when you become young adults, that the satisfaction with the marriage usually increases. Indeed, this is the idea that to have kids is a huge challenge for parents and is a huge challenge for the couple because it brings more topics for discussion and so on. So when we have uh, when we decide to leave someone, indeed we are exposed to risks of conflict. But it's possible to live well and to be happy with someone for all life. And there were some studies trying to identify what are the main coping mechanisms for a couple to keep together and to be happy together in life. And this will be important for you if you'll be working as psychologists, as counselors, because these coping mechanisms are what you should try to promote in your future clients or with your friends if they ask you for some advice or for some counseling. Indeed, these coping mechanisms for a couple are essential for someone to continue to live together with someone, to keep a family, and to be happy. And the first coping mechanism is to have realistic expectations, not to expect too much. Indeed, successful couples are those who accept that sometimes things are not perfect. We accept that sometimes people don't think or do things that we will not approve, but this is part of life. So to have realistic expectations and to accept that things don't have to be perfect is one important coping mechanism. The second is to focus on the positive. The idea that, um, yes, there are things that we would like the other to do different, but we accept that. But we try always to focus on the good things that the other people has. And when we focus on the positive, when we value more the positive than the negative, this will make us keep our relationship. Another aspect is compromising, is to be able to negotiate uh, and to understand other points of view, to know that sometimes we need to not do exactly the way we want, but we know that sometimes I expect the others also to do some compromise with me. So when we do this together and we are not static and rigid defending our own position, we can always when feel better when we try to reach a consensus. Finally, one very important aspect is to avoid suffering in silence. Sometimes it happens that in a couple, someone is not happy with the relationship. Someone is suffering, but does not express what is feeling. And the other member of the couple might be thinking that everything is okay, that everything is, because everything is calm. He or she never complained, never told me anything. And I don't know, and everything is okay with me. And sometimes it comes to a point in which the other person cannot deal with this suffering anymore. And sometimes it's too late. So to avoid suffering in silence and to have an open communication with the partner is a very, very important coping mechanism. However, not all the times things work properly in a relationship. And unfortunately, more often than what was expected, it happens, and there is domestic violence in the family. And domestic violence is indeed mostly against women, is indeed something that United Nations is identifying as a very, very serious problem around the world, and in Macau too. In Macau, indeed, we also have many cases of domestic violence. Indeed, domestic violence in Macau was considered a public crime only recently. We have in Macau NGO giving support for victims of domestic violence, which is the Macau Good Shepherd, who has two centers to support these women. And this exists because women who are exposed to violence, well, I'm talking about women because most of the cases are women, but indeed there are also cases of domestic violence through men, but usually those cases don't come that much to public because men are more ashamed to assume that they are victims of domestic violence in their relationship. But the studies are showing that women who are exposed to violence in their relationship, they have many emotional problems related to loss of confidence, feelings of helplessness, depression, suicidal tendencies, stress disorder, and also alcoholism as a way of coping with that violence. And we will not talk that much about domestic violence because that is not the main topic of this course. I just would like to highlight what is called a cycle of violence in domestic violence. I would like to highlight this idea that this is a cycle, and when we'll be identifying or observing domestic violence appearing, we need to be very strong with the victim because the victims of domestic violence, they see systematically themselves in a situation in which they are uh, being aggressive, being beaten. The aggressor, uh, asks for apologize and promises that this will not never happen anymore, and that this was the last time. This will not happen. Please trust me, forgive me. And the victim will believe, will give another chance, but typically the tension will grow up again, and the moment the tension will grow up again, the violence will happen again. Indeed, this is a kind of language of violence and a cycle, and the moment it happens and it appears, it's really hard to get out of it. So as someone who, when we identify these, it's really important to put the victim out of this cycle. That's why these shelters to support victims are essential, because they put them out of this toxic relationship and to break this cycle of violence in which someone beats, then apologize and promise that it will never happen, but it will happen again. So to break this cycle is really, really essential. But when we are involved in a family, one really important aspect that happens is parenthood. Parenthood is one of the most important decisions of the life of a couple, of the life of someone. The moment in which we decide to assume new roles, taking care of someone, really changes our life. And when we have the first kid, uh, is a very, very sensitive moment. This is what we call a transition to parenthood. The moment we decide to have the first kid. Because children, we are young, we don't have experience. When kids, when they come, they don't have an instructions manual. And and there are many changes in our life. And this creates many tensions in the family. Uh, the new parents, usually they argue more. Uh, Usually they feel physically exhausted. And they report to have much less time for themselves and less time for each other. They don't have the same time to talk, to to have sex. They don't have the same time for simple affection or to do other things together, like to cook together because someone has to be taking care of the kids while someone is doing that, or even to go to the cinema together or to go to a bar together and with the friends. So many things change when we have the first kid. And there is a period of adaptation. And this is why, as I showed you in that graph about the marital satisfaction, when kids are coming to our life becomes great, but the satisfaction with our marital relationship will decrease. Of course, that this is not necessarily bad, but I want you to highlight that again, this is not a fairy tale. This implies responsibility, some suffering, and sometimes it's not easy. Well, but love is also about that. As I told you, is about taking care of our rules. But more than besides the transition to parenthood, we also have the other transitions in our families. One typical is what is called the empty nest syndrome. The empty nest syndrome is related to the experience when our kids leave home. More or less the age your parents are now. When you finish your faculty, most of you will leave home, and your parents will have their nest empty. And to get used to this new reality, to these new roles, is really, really a challenge for the parents. And this is very well expressed in this cartoon that I put here for you to see. Besides the emptiness syndrome, we also have the boomerang children. This might also be a challenge for adults. Yeah, and this is related to the fact when our kids left home, they decide to return again. This might happen, for instance, because uh, my daughter, she got divorced and now she will return home, or because my son he was fired from his job and he cannot support take care of himself, so he will be back home. So the boomerang is like the boomerang that we see, that thing that we throw, that he leaves but will return. And when we are adults, this might also bring challenges to ourselves. When we were in a situation in which we were organizing ourselves to live a new period of life, and suddenly we have our kids coming together. Finally, and this is a particularly sensitive moment, is what we call the sandwich generation. And this is related to this period in our lives in which or in which some people lives, in which we have both people to take care. From one side, we have children, and we need to take care of our children. And on the other side, we have our elderly parents, and we need to take care of our parents. So this is a kind of sandwich in which we are in the middle, having to take care of my parents and having to take care of my kids. And being in between, this might be a very challenging moment of our lives. Well, I put here another cartoon illustrating the difficulties of the empty nest syndrome. Another important aspect related to intimacy and relations and social emotional development in adulthood is about sexuality. As we already talked, sexuality is about physical needs, about emotional tension, but sexuality is also about emotional development, a sense of intimacy and being close to someone. And this is indeed an important dimension of most adults. And if you'll be counselors, you should be aware that problems related to sexuality are many times the reason for conflicts in a problem, for conflicts in the couple, and are also the reason for many emotional and mental health problems in adults. Indeed, the sexual drive and this dimension of sexuality declines with age, but continues to be important through our lives. And indeed, in middle adulthood, there are studies showing that in middle adulthood, there is a kind of uh, growing interest for sexuality. Eventually, because kids are leaving home, I don't have that many concerns, so I will find sexuality for myself again. If you saw the film American Beauty, this is a very interesting film talking about the importance of sexuality in middle adulthood. Indeed, I put here this graph about the frequency of sexual intercourse. So this graph is showing the percentage of men and women that are having sex with these different frequencies, not at all, a few times per year, a few times per month, 2 or 3 times per week, and 4 or more times per week. And as you can see, with age, the percentage of those are reporting to have a few times per month increases, uh, and but we can see that sex, the need to have sex, to keep a sexual life, it's important through all cycle of life. But with time, with age, our sexuality brings some challenges to ourselves. Uh, in the case of men, what is normative, what usually happens, is that it takes more time to achieve an erection. So to have an erection for men starts to become more complicated, and uh, after having one orgasm, it's more complicated to have another one. On the other hand, the fluid that is ejaculated is starting to become less. And this is related with a decrease in the production of testosterone. That's why at some point of life, many men start to have these blue pills or other medicines to help them to have erection and to have a to have a good sexual life. But also women, they have challenges for themselves in their related to sexual life. The vagina begins to shrink, and because of that, the intercourse might start to become painful, uh, and the sexual pleasure might reduce um, because of this. And even the sexual drive might reduce too. That's also why, the same way for men, there are some pills, some medicines that might help to overcome this. Uh, Both in women and men, sexuality has one interesting principle, that is, use it or lose it. And indeed, the more a man or a woman they stop having sex, the less they will have willingness to continue to have sex. So even at this level, to keep regularity and to talk openly about sexuality is very important for the couple, because indeed, as I told you, this might be an important reason for conflict and for mental health problems in adults. Finally, to finish talking about uh, social and emotional development in adulthood, I would like to finish with a reflection about normative crisis versus life events. When we talked about Erikson and these stages of psychosocial development, we talked about normative crisis. Erikson told and identified crises that he was expecting to happen to everybody in different moments of our life. However, recent studies are saying that this is outdated. And this is outdated essentially because not necessarily those crises will appear in those specific moments of life. As many authors are saying, society is always changing. Different societies are different, and different periods of history, different challenges might appear to different people. So more than to talk about normative crises, recently the authors are saying that it makes sense to talk about life events and developmental tasks. What are the events, significant events that happens in our life, the tasks that we have to solve in different moments of our life, and how we do. From the book of Martin Feldman, I identified the most important developmental tasks in adulthood and middle adulthood. And you can take a look and to identify what are these tasks that we have in our development. And indeed, the way we deal with these tasks will affect our life and our emotional well-being. Finally, one last thought about this idea of midlife crisis. It's very common for people to talk about, oh, when someone will reach 40 years old, a man, what a man wants is to have a nice car, to get divorced, to have a younger wife, a younger woman, because they start to question everything. Indeed, as I told you already, it's around 40 years old when we reach the middle of our life. That's why we become his middle adulthood, that we have the perception that life is finite. Sometimes this is related with the death of our own parents. And the idea that, okay, now that my parents died, naturally, next time it's my turn. And this might bring a new perspective about life. But this is not necessarily a crisis. This, indeed, this is a myth. And in most of the cases, reaching middle age is not a crisis, but a moment of discovery and a moment of having more pleasure and satisfaction with life. A moment in which we start to be more focused on the present and to appreciate what life is giving us. So I would like to to clarify that this middle life crisis does not have to happen necessarily. Indeed, in middle age we might change, but we can live this with tranquility and with a higher sense of harmony and awareness about our own life. To conclude, the idea that the moment we are living our adulthood and uh, getting older, more important of age is the importance is more important than age is how I feel about my age. And the studies are showing, and we have here this interesting graph. The studies are showing that people who feel younger than their chronological age, they have lower mortality rate. What this means? I am 47 years old, but usually people say that I don't look like having 47 years old. And indeed, I don't think about my age as a limitation, and I don't think about my age as, oh, I'm almost 50 years old. No, I really feel the same, or I feel younger. And the studies are showing that when people feel younger than their actual age, they live longer. And they live longer with higher quality of life. On the opposite, those people, oh, I'm already 47, I'm feeling so old. These people will have higher mortality rates and they will not live that happy. So the way we perceive and the way we feel our age can also make a difference. So the perception that we have about our age. So it's also important for us to feel that we are young. that even though we have some 50, 60, 70, that we still can do things, and our spirit and our mind is still young. And this is scientific, and this is shown, and this paper is really important and interesting to illustrate this assumption. And this is what I prepared for today's class. Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope to see you next Monday. Thank you.